We continue the list of illustrations directed by Albert Leighton Rawson, engraved by Linton, Filmer, and others. Hebron, page 82. There has been a city on or near the site of the present place, which is called Kulil, the friend of God, meaning Abraham, ever since the time of the earliest records in history. Well, I don't know about the earliest now, but perhaps older than they typically want to place Abraham even. Because most want to place him, the 1800s BCE or the 1700s BCE, when there's indication of two other possible dates, like the 31st century BCE, and what's the date that marks the takeover of the cult of Marduk? The whole district is unfavorable to an agricultural life and is noted for its good soil and the great variety of products, especially the vine, fig, olives, and is as well watered as any part of the country south of Jerusalem. In his days of prosperity, under David and Solomon, every foot of land was carefully dressed. The hillsides, which are now stony and barren, were terraced and supported by a dense population. The crops are still excellent and are rotated in the most scientific manner from tradition, grain and vegetables giving place to melons and cucumbers. The most interesting antiquity in the village is the Haram, or Mosque of Hebron, which is the successor of some more ancient structure built over the cave of Machpelah, in which were buried Sarah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It is possible that some part of the building, the beveled or rebated stones, are the remains of some work of Solomon or David. The only point against the supposition being the silence of Josephus, who would probably have noticed such a work and given it prominence in his antiquities, or perhaps he didn't like some of the association with it. It may then have been, as it is claimed by some critics, the work of someone since the time of the Romans, or more probably than any theory, the Haram is a relic of several ages put into its present shape sometime during or after the Crusades. Now, in the Islamic tradition, they do not make shrines for the people who have died. Even the prophets get tombstones smaller than this page. They certainly don't erect a masjid over it, but like when they do erect one, they move the graves elsewhere, and stuff like that. Well, I'm talking about the Islamic tradition, not necessarily what people who are called Muslim do. There's a difference. It's like you can't blame if somebody's religion. Well, I mean, obviously, if they're a mix of Islam and something else, obviously at that point. But like if somebody claims to be a biblical Christian and doesn't follow the Bible in this way or that, do you blame Christianity for their not following it, or them, right? The successor of the Oak of Memre is a terebinth tree nearly 2 miles from Hebron in the opposite direction from the real site. It measures 22 feet in circumference and shades a space of about 90 feet diameter The church of Constantine was built near this tree, a few of the stones of which are still to be seen, some large ones measuring 14 feet in length. King David lived there 7 years and a half as king of Judah, and was crowned there king of all the tribes. Glass is the chief manufacture at present, which is made up into a great variety of articles for domestic use and ornaments for women's wear, such as rings, earrings, bracelets, anklets, which are of every possible tint and pattern. Many women are so poor as to be unable to get any better jewelry than this cheap glass. And some of the stuff is their dowry or something. What's the Islamic teaching about the dowry is that, you should at least give an iron ring, not even a steel ring, an iron ring. Of course, the woman can stipulate whatever she wants. She should be able to, feed her that a first handful of fruit, and But yeah, in some cultures, all the stuff that they wear is, a sign of their thing, and some of that they can sell, and if they need to dip into savings, the woman's wearing the savings. In Archon, page 40, the only public house offered by the Orientals is a 2-story structure with a large enclosed space for animals and goods. And some of that stuff of having a pile of jewelry on them and that sort of stuff is it's cultural. It's closed space for animals and goods. The lower story is used for storage and for feeding and housing animals, and the upper for travelers. In some of the great khans, as at Damascus, the court is roofed over, and the building is 3 or 4 stories high and has a great number of rooms. No furniture or bedding is ever provided by the innkeeper, and every needed article must be supplied by the lodger. This makes it necessary to have camels for baggage, besides for riding, and so every part of half a dozen forms a little caravan of 10 to 15 camels are camels, horses, and donkeys. The inn of Chimhan is, I don't know what all these words mean. Chimhan, Khan, they say that Khan is the word for inn. The inn of Chimham is the first mentioned in the scriptures and was at Bethlehem, which is also a word for the constellation Virgo. So there's indication that way. But on the road to Egypt, and of course Egypt has certain significances too, and not just the whole Exodus thing, as alluded to by Jeremiah 41:17, and it is not probable that it was the same public house in which Jesus was born. Its site is now occupied by a convent which dates from the Crusades, if not from the time of the Empress Helena, mother of Constantine, and is the oldest Christian church in the world. It was repaired by King Edward IV of England, Baldwin, the famous crusader and king of Jerusalem, and was crowned in it. The building is venerable and majestic and interesting from its material history. Its roof is made of the cedar of Lebanon, and its marble columns were gathered from many countries. The gifts of princes and devout persons, some of the Byzantine pillars, are painted with curious devices which are almost obliterated, being very much time-worn and weather-stained. The history and tradition of the cave of the Nativity, which is under the church, being reached by a number of steps cut down in the solid rock, and in which is asserted that Jesus was born, extends back almost to the death of John the Evangelist and Revelator. Caves and recesses in the rock are now used, and probably always have been, as a refuge for cattle, and also for people, as is often noticed in the scriptures. But still, there is very little to be said in the favor of a cave having been part of the original inn. Jerome translated the Bible in a grotto at Bethlehem, which may have been in this same cave where a grotto is shown as his studio, although it has been very much enlarged in latter times and is now a very showy, if not actually a splendid room filled with gilt ornaments of religious interest, the gifts of the pious pilgrims of many ages. Marble pavement, marble columns, panels, silver, brass, and copper lamps, with gold ornaments and massive metal candlesticks, highly enriched with engraving and gilding, and inscriptions, sculptured and gilded, and more showy and apparently more valuable than all the rest. A radiated star around the inscription recording the birth of the Savior, made of colored glass. Now remember, the Zoroastrian use of the word Savior, the Seoshant, was not some deity incarnate, but somebody who had a saving example, a saving teaching that they brought in to stir up society to, save themselves. An imitation of precious stones and placed over the grotto, which is pointed out as the very spot on which Jesus was born. There was formerly a star composed of real gold and precious stones, including many valuable diamonds and emeralds, and so on, which was removed by some avaricious and unworthy custodian, and the present cheap imitation substituted. The walls, and in many places the roof also, are covered with richly dyed silk hangings, and these extremisms kind of take away from some of that stuff. And why is this wealth not given to the poor? Sinai, page 48. The Sinai of tradition and of many modern investigators is shown in the view, which was taken from the plain El Raha, a little west of the convent. The whole group of peaks is named Jebel Musa, Mount Moses, and the peak nearest to the convent is called Ras Sufsafa, head of the willow, from a single willow tree which grows on it. The summit is about 2,000 feet above the plain and has on it a chapel and the ruins of a mosque, which may be reached by a few minutes of hard climbing. The whole mountain stands out against the sky like a huge altar, being separated by valleys on all sides from the mountains around. The plain of Raha is 2 miles long, half a mile wide, which slopes gently towards the mountain, forming a natural amphitheater, on which many thousands could camp and distinctly view the mountain from its base to its summit. And watching this program, what was there, like 22 or 21, or there were a lot of Mount Moseses, but like the mountains of Ararat, it's literally the mountains of Ararat. And Mount Judy, again, is something that once in 10,000 year tidal wave from a impact that hit the nearby sea could have reached, Succoth, the boots, page 84. It is still called by its ancient name, pronounced by the Arabs Sukkot, and is believed to mark the place where Jacob crossed the Jordan River, a few miles below Bethshun, Beit-San or something. The booths must have been on the east side of the river, but the name has been transferred across, for Sukkot is now on the west side. Or perhaps it was to begin with, and the traditions kind of messed that part up. Other names have passed over Jordan in the same manner as Jebel Musa near Jericho, Moses' mountain, meaning the one from which he viewed the promised land, which was on the east side. The vessels for Solomon's temple were cast in the clay ground on the Jordan banks between Succoth and Zartan, and there are very fine and deep clay beds there now. The clay from which is hard, almost slaty, easily softened and molded, and the best known for casting metals in to this day. The whole vicinity of Scoth abounds in springs and brooks, and there is much water now, as there was in the time of John's ministry. John 3:22. The ford, so called, for there is no passable place as a ford there opposite Jericho, near the Jews' castle, is one of the localities of the monks. Ford of the Jordan, page 58. The view is of a place near Nimrim, the Panthers, where there is a rather difficult ford in the season of low water, but none at all in the winter. There are several fords in the summertime, which are used by travelers and the natives as opposite Bethshan, near Succoth, just north of Wadi Yabez, Jabesh, which is supposed to be the same as the Bethabara, Judges 7:24. There are several others north of the Mount of the Jabbok, 10 miles south of that river. There is a good one on the road from Nablus, Shechem, to Asalt, Ramoth, and Gilead. And there are ruins of a Roman bridge there also. There are fords both above and below the pilgrims' bathing place, Leighton, opposite Jericho. The upper one is supposed to be the one crossed by Joshua. The river below the bathing place is swift and deep and cannot be forded. Carmel, page 90. The mountain is 1,800 feet at the east and 500 feet high at the west end, and is nearly 18 miles long from the site of the sacrifice of Baal's prophets to the convent overlooking the sea. It is the most picturesque region in Palestine, in variety of hillsides, mountain slopes covered with the most luxuriant vegetation, and carpeted with countless flowers. The forests abound in wild game such as partridge, quail, woodcock, hare, jackal, wolf, hyena, boar, and bear. Yeah, the pigs and land-eating animals are bad choices for eating animals. And just don't hunt for a trophy. What's wrong with you? Just hunting so if you can put something on a wall. The mountain has been famous from remote antiquity as a holy place, having had among the visitors to its shrines the ancient philosopher Pythagoras and Emperor Vespasian. The present building, standing on the west and near the sea, was erected in 1830 of the Common Era over the ancient ruins of the convent originally standing there, which was founded by St. Louis of France, who named the order the Barefoot Carmelite Friars. Capernaum, page 112, which had been so utterly destroyed as to leave scarcely any trace of its site, has been restored to history beyond a doubt by the researches and discoveries of W.M. Thompson, Land and Book, and the Palestine Exploration. Jerusalem recovered. The ruins lie scattered over a hill called Tel Hum, which rises from the water edge of the Sea of Galilee, and which is an excellent site for a city, being high, commanding a wide prospect across the sea, south, over the plains and hills east, the plain of Gennesaret, and the hills of Galilee west, and the mountains around Saphid, while snow-capped Hermon is in view northeast. There is a ruin of the synagogue, which may have been built or improved by the centurion mentioned in Matthew, who was in command of Roman troops stationed there. The building was made of limestone, brought from a distance, and there are a few pieces of sculptured ornaments, columns, cornices, lintels left, which indicate that the structure was magnificent in size and workmanship. One of the lintels had sculptured on it a pot of manna as an ornament among scrolls and other figures, which proves that the building was a religious edifice built by Jews. Does it? They talk about, well, how do you distinguish between the people who were, as a slur, called Palestinian, because there was no Palestine until the Romans conquered the place. And, the ancient Israelites. Well, you couldn't. They're all the same people. Canaan and all this other stuff. They were all northern Semites. So, and Judaism took took a while to actually appear in any sense. It doesn't go back 5,000 years. It doesn't go back whatever. It doesn't go back to Moses or anything like that. Judaism in no sense existed before about 540 BCE. By name, it existed probably about 2,200 years ago. The second book of Maccabees, give it another generation or whatever, but there was also a cemetery with graves and regular tombs cut in the rock or built above the surface. The ruins cover a space nearly as large as the town of Tiberias, and the place may have contained in its greatest prosperity 50,000 inhabitants. The materials may have been carried away during the last 1,000 years to reappear in other cities or have been burnt into lime, as has been done at other places. The other claimants to the site of Capernaum do not present ruins which answer the demand of the text, and Talmud does. The evangelists did not give topographical indications directly, for they were not writing a geography. While Josephus, as a soldier and engineer, was careful to notice localities, and his description of Capernaum and other places is very complete. The miracle of feeding 5,000 persons with food created for the purpose was considered by all the evangelists of very great importance, and as they have all mentioned Capernaum and Bethsaida in connection with the account, geographers have been so perplexed as to attempt to invent a second Bethsaida at the head of the lake west of Capernaum. Well, there were, as we know about Bethlehem and Nazareth, different places with the same name. The preaching by the sea may be located somewhere along the coast between Tel Hum and Tebaga, where there are several creeks and inlets, which the boat ship in the gospel could ride in safety only a few feet from the shore, and where the multitude could be seated on the dry shore, where there are as many boulders of basalt, smooth and convenient for seats. The first 4 of the apostles were fishermen, and there are no more favorable places for carrying on their business than this very shore, where the boats could be kept in safety and their nets mended on the hard shell paved beach. See Tel Hum. And the bread and fish, there's things you can say there, but bread can be the flesh itself, and fish can be blood. So it can be a symbolic inclusion to connect the two things, right? Oh, he has miraculous power over flesh and blood, and then we consume the flesh and blood, and, all that. Cana, page 120. There is a division of opinion among scholars on the question of the site of the ancient Cana. One party holding that Kepher Cana a village 3 miles northwest of Nazareth, is the true site. Another, that which is now called Cana el Jalil, Cana of Galilee, is the site of the village in which the marriage feast was held. Because remember, the Gospel of John, 90-something% of its oldest version is like unto something about Bacchus. Or perhaps it still is 90-something%. It's just not as high of a percentage because it's been edited and it's become a bigger text. Which is said the wine was created from water. Because Bacchus was a partier, right? But it only makes sense that thing. Oh no, mother, it's my responsibility. It's like, why is he telling his mother that? Unless she was leading the wedding, setting up the wedding for her son and his responsibility because he was the bridegroom. Cana el Jalil was selected as the more beautiful of the two in a pictorial sense, and besides the evidence seems to be greatly in its favor. It lies on the end of a ridge at the foot of Jebel Kawkab, so Mount of the Star or celestial body, just at the border of the plain of Tauf, plain of Issachar, 8 miles north of Nazareth. The site is very favorable for fine views overlooking the plain and including distant glimpses of several mountains well known in the Bible narrative as Hermon, Tabor, Gilboa, Carmel, and Lebanon. The ancient writers Antoninus Martyr, 590 of the Common Era, Saint Willibald, 780 of the Common Era, Sawolf, 1103 of the Common Era, Maurice, Sanutus, 1321 of the Common Era, Bredenbach, 1483 of the Common Era, Anselm, 1507 of the Common Era, Edricamus, 1575 of the Common Era, unite in describing the site as believed to have been correctly located in their day at the foot of a high road mountain on the north, a plain, broad and fertile on the south, and with Sephoris between it and Nazareth, all of which particulars are found at Cana el Jalil. These writers also describe 6 water parts and a triclinium where the feast was held, the whole being in a caravan or grotto, underground, like that of the Nativity at Bethlehem, and also of the Annunciation at Nazareth. The water pots shown there are not reliable as antiquities, because they are a common article of domestic use, and are made when wanted in every age and every year, and a few broken jars can always be had to lend their appearance in aid of a popular tradition. It is therefore not surprising that water pots are shown at both the sites of Cana, and both claimed as veritable antiquities. The general truth of the event, the Galilean village, the custom of the people keeping water and wine jars of pottery, can be proven beyond question, but the house in which the feast was held and the jars that held the water made wine have passed away into their original dust. John's prison, Macaros, page 148, Herod the Great built a place and a prison, and probably bathhouses also, at the hot springs of Caliroa on the river Main, about 8 miles from the Dead Sea. Josephus describes it, Wars 6, chapter 1, as a very rocky hill, elevated to a great height, ditched about with valleys on all sides to such a depth that the eye cannot reach their bottoms, that on the west, reaching to the lake Asphaltites, and on that same side, the castle had the tallest top of its hill. The cliffs are 200 feet, about 150 apart, and the streams from the hot springs is 6 to 10 inches deep, 50 to 100 feet wide, and runs 4 or 5 miles an hour. The ruins of the castle or palace, and perhaps other houses, are scattered over several acres of the ridge, and nearly half a mile from the ravine. The finest view is had by moonlight, when the almost daylight of the full moon gives a wild and strange character to the scene. There has as yet been no exploration on the east of the Dead Sea, except at a few points, and it is believed that the richest results would follow from the examination of certain well-known ruins, such as those at Machaerus and at Heshbon, Rabbath Ammon, by scientific men properly provided with instruments and assistants. Shechem, page 149. The village lies between 2 hills, Abal and Gerizim, which are on the great dividing ridge between the Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea. It is now called Nablus, a corruption of Neapolis, the Greek name given to it by Vespasian. Well, corruption and saying it in a different language is not exactly the same thing. And that's definitely not the same thing as some of these variations of names. It's obvious they're just trying to make it different, right? The Greek name given to it by Vespasian. John speaks of it as Sychar, and Pliny called it Mabortha. The valley is about 1,500 feet wide between the 2 mountains, and its general level is 1,800 above the sea. The valley is full of springs and good water, the people counting as many as 80. Some of these springs send the waters into the Jordan, others into the Mediterranean. The soil is rich and very productive in orchards, gardens, and fields, and is not equaled in Palestine for its glory of fruit and verdure, running brooks, and singing birds. Abraham pitched his tent under the oak of Moreh, and there first set up the worship of the living God near to Shechem. In this vicinity was also most probably the residence of Melchizedek, the king of Salem, in or near that little modern village of Salem. Because they didn't include the city part of it initially. But it was the town of wholeness, peace. The Samaritans also claim that Moriah, on which Abraham laid out Isaac, ready for the sacrifice, was Mount Gerizim. Shechem also was the residence of the grandson of Abraham, Jacob, who bought a field and dug a well. See Jacob's well. It is probably on account of those well-known facts in the history of the place that Moses regarded it as the most sacred spot in Canaan, and the only one consecrated to the worship of the living God, and that accordingly he ordered a great assembly of the people there. The experiment has been made of 2 readers stationed on opposite sides of the valley, on Abal and Gerizim, who read the blessings and the curses in a loud voice, and were distinctly heard by each other. The bones of Joseph were also brought from Egypt by the children of Israel, and buried, as tradition says, in the level spot close under the foot of Mount Ebal. Jacob's Well, page 153. The remarkable work called Jacob's Well is in the plain of Mukna, a mile and a half from the village Nablus. Shechem, Joseph's tomb, is in plain view near Mount Ebal. There are none who dispute the identity of this well as having been the work of Jacob and his servants. The most surprising thing about it is that a well should have been dug at all in a place which abounds in natural springs of bright, sweet water, and sufficient in quantity to supply several brooks. The visitor now first descends into a chamber about 10 feet in the floor of which is the mouth of the well, only large enough to admit the body of a man. This opening is broken through an arch which has not been very long ago built over the well. The shaft is 7 feet 6 inches in diameter and 70 feet deep down into the rubbish, which is supposed to be 50 to 75 feet deeper. It is lined with rough masonry, having been dug through alluvial soil. There are ruins of the church which once stood over the well scattered about, but no signs of any curb or enclosing wall of any kind around the mouth. John 4:1. This is one of the few places in Palestine that is not honored by some edifice or monument locating the Bible narrative, but it is said that the Greeks, Russians, have lately bought the place. What did somebody say? Orthodox, and they presumed the Greeks, but it was really the Russian Orthodox, with intention of building a church over the well. The valley of Mukna, the ancient Morah, is one of the richest in the production of grain, fruit, vegetables in all the land. Vines, figs, oranges, lemons, pomegranates, in short, every fruitful tree, and all growing beside never-failing streams of pure water. The valley extends for about 7 miles and is the fairest expanse of cultivated soil in all the land. Samaritan priest, page 159. The Assyrians carried away to the Euphrates the Jews of Samaria and sent their own people to occupy the cities and the land. From these immigrants, the modern Samaritans are descended. Well, given that Samaritan relates to people, the caravan, and so you can actually put other origins to the idea too. They have kept a copy of the law as it was on their day, 500 BCE, and still celebrated that ancient form of worship, although there are only about 100 of them left. The dress of the priest may be, and probably is, a correct following of the ancient style, and its description answers the requirements of the text in Exodus very closely. Well, the Samaritans have their own Exodus. There's some differences. I forget how many. I have a book here. The enmity between the Jews and the Samaritans began when they refused to have a share in the rebuilding the temple at Jerusalem after their return from the captivity at Babylon, where they built a temple for themselves on Mount Gerizim at Shechem in the time of Alexander. This was destroyed by John Hyrcanus, 129 BCE. In the 5th century of the Common Era, there was a Christian church on Gerizim, but only a few stones of the foundation are left. And we have another program or two of this.